He'd been granted a royal pardon by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and was due to be released later this week. Respect MP George Galloway had been speaking with the Syrian President and Foreign Minister about his arrangements to fly to Damascus to bring Abbas Khan home.
I was in touch daily for 7 days with the Foreign Minister directly, and I gave them my putative flight arrangements, and we discussed the cars and the security for the hazardous journey through the north of Lebanon and from the border to Damascus. That's why I say it is inexplicable what has happened.
And did the Foreign Minister, did he explain to you why they decided now of all times to release Mr. Khan?
Well, I'd been pushing for it for almost a year, involving both the President and the Foreign Minister and other ministers, the Justice Minister, for example, liaising very regularly with the family, the sister and the mother of the deceased. And I did so because they asked me to, and because I live in Streatham, as did Dr. Khan, and the local mosque where he worshipped came and asked me to try to rescue him from his plight.
And did the Foreign Minister explain why they decided to give a pardon now?
Yes, they told me they would, always, but that the case had to go through due process, as they put it. The trial had to continue, and the verdict would be set aside by the President, and he would be released to me. And I conveyed all of that to the family throughout the months that this was going on.
The Foreign Ministry in Syria have spoken to the BBC tonight, and they're insistent that Mr. Khan took his own life. What's your belief?
Well, I just can't believe that because I know that he knew that I was coming to get him just 4 days later. And a man who'd endured everything that he had endured over 12 months, his weight fell, as you may know, to less than 5 stone. He underwent terrible ordeals in the jails in Syria, which are not a pleasant place at the best of times. And these are the worst of times. It's just inconceivable that a man would commit suicide 4 days before a freedom that he had told his family he was desperately looking forward to.
I'm going to play you what the Foreign Office Minister Hugh Robertson has said about this and then get your reaction after this.
The fact remains that he went to Syria to help the people of Syria who are affected by the civil war. There is no excuse whatsoever for the treatment that he has suffered by the Syrian authorities, who have in effect murdered a British national who was in their country to help people injured during their civil war.
Can you recall a time when a British government of any political persuasion has accused another government of murder?
Well, the British government is up to its neck in murder in Syria. We are supporting with money and with so-called non-lethal military aid the tens, maybe scores of thousands of foreign extremist jihadists who have swarmed into Syria and all around it and have killed many, many thousands of people, usually because of the minority religious group to which they belong. So I don't take any lectures from a Conservative minister in Britain about murder in Syria. But he's right in this respect. Dr. Khan was an orthopedic surgeon. He went to Syria out of religious conviction to help people injured, sometimes awfully injured, in the course of this grotesque war that Syria has suffered for 3 years. So I don't have much sympathy for the Foreign Office. They did virtually nothing to have Dr. Khan released, and the only contact they had with me was to warn me not to go to Damascus to rescue him, because they said they do not have command and control over these jihadists. And that's precisely my point. We're giving them guns, we're giving them aid of all kinds, but we have no command and control over them. It's a Frankenstein monster that we've been a part of creating there.
Do you believe that Dr. Khan was murdered?
Yes, I'm certain that he was. I disagree also with Mr. Robertson in this respect. It was the Syrian authorities, the President and the Foreign Minister, acting on the President's behalf, that asked me to come and take Dr. Khan home for Christmas. So I'm certain that it wasn't a decision of the Syrian leadership, but in a way, what's happened makes that even worse, because clearly some elements of the Syrian security services are out of the control of the President and ready to defy his wishes and bring this disgrace upon their country.
So you're convinced it was the security services that murdered him against the wishes of the president?
Well, the president would not have asked me right down to what plane are you getting off, and we'll have a car waiting at the airport. They would not have asked me to come if they were going to execute him 4 days before I got there.
He has written in his most recent letter that he's being kept, this is a quote, being kept in appalling and inhumane conditions, seen my mental health markedly deteriorate. I suffer from almost constant depression and suicidal ideation. Do you think, given he's written that there is any shred of credibility to the fact that he may have taken his own life?
I really don't, because the family tell me that he knew that I was coming just 4 days later, and that he was desperately looking forward to reuniting with a family that have fought every inch of the way in this terrible story to have him freed. So I really don't. But of course he had suffered that ordeal that reduced his weight to skeletal levels, and who had no doubt, had serious implications for his mental health. But there's no reason to believe that 4 days before being released that he would take his own life.
Have you spoken to his mother since you found this news out? Because she's been in Damascus, hasn't she?
Yeah, no, I speak to the sister in London regularly, and I'm in touch with them regularly. I think the mother is now in Beirut, and the best thing that the Syrian authorities can do now is to immediately release the body to the care of his family for religious reasons, but also so that an independent autopsy can take place. If that doesn't happen, then not only will we never know the whole truth, nobody, and that includes me, will believe the official story.
And will you be asking the President and the Foreign Minister to assist you with that request?
I have done. From the moment that I learned of his death.
Amidst all of this, and what it may or may not tell us about Syria and the fragility of what's going on there in the civil war, a family here has lost a son, a father, and a brother.
Indeed. It's an absolute unspeakable tragedy. It's an obscenity, and it brings disgrace on Syria. And as I said, given that I exculpate the president, who wouldn't have invited me to come and bring the prisoner home, that means that there are elements ready to murder in defiance of the decisions of their political leadership, and that doesn't augur well.
Respect MP George Galloway talking to me there. He was due to fly to Damascus at the end of the week to bring home Mr. Abbas Khan. His brother Shah Nawaz Khan will be on 5 Live Breakfast talking to Nikki Campbell and Rachel Burden tomorrow morning from 6 a.m. 10:47, going to be talking about fracking before 11 on the front page.
Chief international correspondent who's in Syria. So George Galloway MP is in Westminster, but you were about to fly out to Syria to try and to bring Mr. Khan home.
I was. I can't match the power of Lise Doucette's report there, which sums up the story perfectly. But all I can add is that I was to fly to Beirut on Friday morning, arriving late in the evening because I couldn't get a direct flight. The Syrian government had laid on cars and security for the hazardous journey through the north of Lebanon, where there's a lot of war going on now too, and across the border and on the difficult road from the border to the capital. So the Syrian government were serious about releasing Dr. Khan, and it was the Deputy Foreign Minister, Mr. Maqdad, that Lise just referred to, who called me in my car about 10 days ago and asked me to be there before Christmas to receive him.
But this is really strange then, isn't it? Because if the government of Syria wanted him to be released as a so-called gift to the UK, why would the government of Syria then kill him?
Well, I'm sure that they didn't kill him, but somebody killed him. And that somebody has to be found within the security apparatus that is acting basically out of control, a rogue security service. The president's writ obviously doesn't run even throughout the government-controlled areas and the public service, because there is no way that the president himself, through the foreign minister, would ask me to come and pick him up and then execute him. Equally, there's no way that Dr. Khan would commit suicide 4 days before I was coming to take him home to see his beloved children.
Well, I was going to ask you about that possibility. I don't know whether the balance of his mind was disturbed, but I guess we can't rule out suicide.
Well, we can't, of course, rule it out. We weren't there. But I've just been with one of Dr. Khan's brothers, Shah Nawaz, who was quoted earlier in your report. And he told me that Dr. Khan was well aware that I was coming to pick him up, that he was elated. He'd written in those terms. He was elated, couldn't wait for the moment. And he had 2 small children that he was desperate to be reunited with. So, of course, it could be suicide, but it's just about the most unlikely suicide you can imagine.
There may be people who get in touch, George, and say, look, it is profoundly dangerous to go into Syria, but not least if you go in on your own, and don't take anything away from how well-meaning Dr. Khan was, but to go in alone to help the rebels is a difficult and dangerous thing to do.
Well, he went there not like these jihadist fanatics that Britain is arming and financing to the teeth. He went in there as an orthopedic surgeon to deal with the horrific wounds that are everywhere in Syria. More than 100,000 people have died, as you know. And he did so for the very best of humanitarian intentions. Of course, he shouldn't have done it. I'm sure that if he had known how it would all end, he wouldn't have done it. He would have stayed on the Turkish side of the border treating refugees, which is what he originally was doing. But of course, Britain is up to its neck in all this. We have been encouraging this war. We've been funding it. We've been providing it with political and diplomatic support and so-called non-lethal military aid. This has all got to stop now. The Geneva talks begin in just a few days in January. Geneva 2. It's time to bring this war to an end.
Thank you very much. George Galloway, MP, talking about the case.
Well, it's inexplicable. I was booked to fly to Beirut and be whisked by Syrian government car from Beirut airport past the wild frontier and onward to Damascus to take delivery of Dr. Khan to bring him home to his family for Christmas. And it's inexplicable that the leadership in Syria would have asked me to do that, indeed pressed me and called me and texted me almost every day for a week to make all the necessary arrangements if they were planning to execute him. So I have absolutely no doubt that the Syrian political leadership is not involved in this crime.
How did you come to learn of his death? I mean, at what stage?
The day before you did, the sister of Dr. Khan called me hysterically to say that our brother had 1 hour before been found dead in his cell. That Dr. Khan knew that I was coming to pick him up 4 days later. It is therefore equally inexplicable that he committed suicide because he had already told his family how elated he was about his impending release and his return to them. That leaves only one option, that someone in the Syrian apparatus murdered this man against the orders of the President of the Republic, and that doesn't augur well.
Have you had any further contact with the government in Syria to clarify matters at all?
Yes, constantly. And I'm calling on them now to immediately release his body to his family for lots of reasons. But the most important being that that's the only way that an independent autopsy can be conducted on Dr. Khan's body. And if that doesn't happen, then no one will ever believe the Syrian government story, including me.
What do you make of these claims from various quarters, including, of course, Dr. Khan's family, that the British Foreign Office did not act decisively enough or forcefully enough to try and obtain his release, given that he was a medical doctor purportedly carrying out humanitarian work?
Well, they didn't act at all. The British Foreign Office did absolutely nothing to get Dr. Khan out of prison in Syria. In fact, the only contact I had with them was 2 telephone calls in which they told me not to go, to bring him back, because they could not guarantee my safety in any way, could not help me in any way to carry out this mission. They said that they had no command and control over the violent fanatics that they have been paying for and helping to arm these last 3 years in Syria. I pointed out that their lack of command and control over this Frankenstein monster that they have created has been precisely my point over the last 3 years. They have built this monster of violent fanatics, and they have no command and control over them. That's as good a definition of a Frankenstein monster as it's possible to imagine.
But you yourself, you were determined to go ahead with your journey to Damascus in spite of the Foreign Office warning. I mean, were they just playing the health and safety card, or do you think they were politically motivated to stop you going?
It could have been the latter. It definitely was the former. Their impotence in this whole picture is a very, very powerful message of the need for diplomatic relations. If they hadn't broken off diplomatic relations in Damascus and expelled the Syrian embassy and consular staff here in London, then they wouldn't have been dependent on a 55-year-old woman, Dr. Khan's mother, who had never been out of this country before, but who somehow managed to get to Damascus and reach all the leading players in Damascus over many months. They wouldn't have been dependent on me, whom they obviously didn't want to see vindicated by bringing Dr. Khan home. They would have been able to do these things themselves.
So obviously, in your view, the British government have mishandled their whole position on Syria.
Well, Britain is up to its neck in the blood and gore in Syria. There's been more than 110,000 lives lost, including the life of Dr. Khan, and Britain is deeply culpable in all of them.
What do you see happening now? Do you think the death of Dr. Khan will have any effect on foreign policy? Will Mr. Haig get involved in this now, albeit too late?
Well, the British, under American orders, have already executed a U-turn on their policy towards Syria and Iran. I may say they've now moved their traveling show to Kiev and the Ukraine, but they have given up in Iran and Syria. And whereas just a few months ago we were on the tarmac revving to send a mission to start bombing Syria, we have now, under American orders, begun to pursue a policy of diplomacy, but too little and too late.
What do you mean by that remark about Ukraine? What do you see the British involvement in Ukraine being?
Well, Britain, the European Union, the United States, John McCain, and so on, at Russia's brilliant, scintillatingly brilliant diplomacy over the Syria question, have sought to get their revenge on the streets of Kiev. That's what they're doing now.
You're not going to make yourself terribly popular in government circles with these remarks, are you?
Well, the last thing in the whole world I would like to be is popular amongst the ranks of the David Cameron, Nick Clegg condemned coalition government.
From Abbas Khan. Well, the Respect MP for Bradford West, George Galloway, had been due to fly to the region this week to collect Mr. Khan. He told me how he became involved with the case.
Well, I live in Streatham, as did Dr. Khan, and he worshipped at the local mosque around the corner from my house. And the mosque came round, the family approached me, and they thought that I would be well placed to negotiate his release. And I've been working on this case now for almost a year. About 7 days ago, I got a call whilst driving in my car from the Foreign Minister of Syria, who said that the President himself had asked him to call me and that I should make haste to Damascus to pick up Dr. Khan and bring him home to his family. And so advanced was this that I had actually made my flight reservations for this Friday, and the Syrian government had made all the arrangements for a motor car and security convoy to take the rather hazardous journey through the north of Lebanon, past Tripoli, which is itself a war zone, and across the Syrian border to Damascus. So you can imagine how flabbergasted I was when 4 days before setting off to bring Dr. Khan home, I got the call to say that he was now dead.
And they said he had killed himself?
Yes, I learned this from Dr. Khan's sister, and I immediately phoned the Foreign Minister, and he told me that he had not been executed. He had committed suicide. I've now had 3 different telephone conversations with him and 5 texts, and they're sticking to the story that Dr. Khan, 4 days before his putative release, hanged himself with his pyjamas in his prison cell, and I simply don't believe it, can't believe it.
What do you think happened?
Well, it's inconceivable that the government, the minister, the president would have asked me to come to pick him up if they were going to execute him 4 days before I got there. So I'm ruling out the Syrian government leaders themselves being involved in this killing, but I'm equally ruling out the idea of suicide. So that seems to point in the direction of a rift somehow, somewhere within the Syrian regime, and some elements of the security services, for some reason, murdering this innocent and helpless prisoner.
The British government's calling it murder. You concur with that?
It's murder most foul, in my view. First of all, he's a very religious man. The Lord hath set his canon against self-slaughter, and for Muslims that's an absolute given. Secondly, having undergone an ordeal of 12 months, during which his weight dropped below 5 stone, the idea that 4 days before I was to take him home to his family, he would kill himself, is just out of the question, in my view. Simple common sense, it rules that out.
George Galloway, MP. Well, I'm joined now on the line from Damascus by our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. There is, I think, a little bit of a delay on the line. But, Lise, what are the Syrian authorities saying to you about this?
It's been quite an astonishing and shocking turn of events, Roger. You heard George Galloway telling about the detailed preparations. I've seen those text messages myself. The Faisal Mekdad, the Deputy Foreign Minister, who was his main contact, showed me those, what their conversation had been about. And a few days earlier, we had been told by the Syrian government that, yes, indeed, Dr. Abbas Khan would be freed. And they were clearly pleased by that. So obviously, something has gone terribly wrong. This was something ordered from the very top. President Assad ordered it. It was clear that his wife, a British citizen, Asma al-Assad, was also part of this. They were hoping, as to use their words, this was meant to be a Christmas present to the people of Britain from the people of Syria. But something terrible has happened in those last moments in Dr. Abbas's cell. We were told that he was given his breakfast at 7 o'clock in the morning, but when they checked on him at 9 o'clock, between 9 and 9:30, and knocked on his cell door, that there was no answer. But Dr. Mekdad, the Deputy Foreign Minister, was categorical that a government autopsy has confirmed for them that this was a suicide. And when I asked him, well, is it possible that intelligence services, members of the intelligence services, could have acted differently? He said this was impossible. No one would differ with the decision of the president.
Do you get the impression the Syrian authorities are very dismayed by what happened?
Shocked. Seeing Dr. Mekdad, he was clearly shocked. And seeing the officials who told us he would be released, they clearly wanted this to happen. This is a government which is trying, at least, let's say, this is the foreign ministry and the people around President Assad want to improve relations with the West. And they have been very confident of late, thinking that their narrative, which is that this is a war against terrorism, look at the divisions among the opposition, look at the growing extremism, look at the attacks by the groups linked to Al-Qaeda. And there have been murmurings in the West that perhaps the real enemy of the West is not President Assad's regime, but actually the Islamists. So things were beginning to turn in the minds of people here. They always felt confident that eventually the West would come around, and they felt vindicated. There's a kind of, I told you so. This is a setback, but I think it will be up to Britain in particular to decide how much of a setback this will be. The authorities in Damascus will not want it to be a setback. And in fact, as George Galloway has hinted too, their biggest political problem now is the wrangling and the accusations and the recrimination, and perhaps even more, that's likely to result. Because somebody, if indeed he was murdered, if we take that version of events, who did it and who dared to defy the president's orders?
Lise, thank you. Lise Doucette there on the line from Damascus. Hunger is becoming